Very good. So first, coming up from Europe, Eva Kaili, member of the European Parliament. She is the driving force behind the blockchain resolution, the crowdfunding resolution, one of the most important women in the space. Please give it up for her.
Thank you. He's being too polite. He's becoming a friend of mine. So.
All the way from the far, far east, where the sun does rise, and I believe it will settle, we have Yoshitaka Tanaka. After the brilliant presentation we've already heard before, discussion rather, he doesn't need introduction anymore. But a gentleman I personally put a lot of hope towards, especially given the current circumstances in the US, Brian Forde. If there is one company which has made wave last year by basically getting the institutional side of things into it, and everybody has been watching it, it's Circle, and I'm really, really happy to welcome Carla Carriveau from Circle. Welcome. And I shall be your humble servant to moderate this wonderful panel. And all I will need is my iPad, because otherwise I won't have my questions. Oh, here it is. Wonderful. So very good. Let's start with a question to all of you, and maybe just let's move through. I put out the claim that regulation has become a strategic dimension. And what is true for the individual entity, you got to get it right. You got to find your regulatory framework to operate. I think it's also true, and it's come out of the various discussions, that you get it right on a macro level. The jury is still out there. Who will be the dominant players, and regulation will decide it. So I've presented sort of the facts around that, but obviously you're closer to it. What is your view? Maybe starting with you, Eva. What's happening in Europe, where it's headed, and what's the likelihood of those things, projects underway, to actually unfold?
First, thank you very much for your kind words. We've been working also together on these issues, and we've been trying to get this opportunity where US had been very negative in the beginning towards this technology, and Asia, it was not the best environment since every now and then they changed their point of view. So we thought that Europe could manage to take the lead there. And I think this, since we work with the authorities also of US, we thought that this drive them or maybe encourage them to change their point of view. I saw recently that they are trying to have a better approach. So what we tried to do, like basically 3 or 4 years ago, since we did have this crisis in my country especially, and we saw that the banking sector needed to change. We tried to see the potential of this technology. So I know that today and yesterday there is like a market that's not going very well, and I have to say that this is completely irrelevant from the technology itself. So don't lose faith in that. I used to go to conferences and they all talk about the prices and when the prices will go up, if we have any tips to give them. This is not the case. So what we try to do is to create legal certainty and make sure that this technology is going to be financed and funded by Europe. We already have the resolution that you mentioned. And this means we release 350 million to support projects in several sectors. And also now with the action plan on fintech, we try to include ICOs in the crowdfunding report. Crowdfunding, so basically treat it as an investment instrument. I really believe that if we expand a bit the scope there, we can start by having the ICOs, some rules about the ICOs, and manage to have a more harmonized environment and more legal certainty there. So maybe some legal standards. So we will keep working together. The next 2-3 months, we expect also ESMA. ESMA is our SEC, trying to besides having directives or like some proposals or some warnings about tokens, to make sure that we will try to figure out the definition that will not be that ICOs are securities, tokens. they are also utilities. But we try to avoid, so we work on the definition because we need to avoid the consumer protection law. This could be worse than securities. So we try to find a new definition, have them as an investment instrument. So we're getting there by December, probably. And of course, as you mentioned, we have Malta and Gibraltar. They already started to have a good, maybe legal framework. Still, they have to fix a few things, and I know Switzerland is doing much better at this moment. But I do believe we will have an open mind, of course, in contrary to ECB and EBA.
Very good. Tanaka-san, when we talk Asia, we're largely talking Singapore, Japan, Korea. Obviously, China being the big unknown out there. You being so close to the action and being a vital part of that ecosystem. Where do you see things going?
今、コインチェックの話が出たと思うんですが、日本はやはり一番進んでいる中でいろいろ法整備進んでたんですが、早かったがゆえにちょっといろいろ抜け穴っていうか落ち度が多くて、それでコインチェックの問題から一度、吹き上がって、日本の、金融庁の方もおせおせでこの仮想通貨の業界、クリプトの業界を推してたんですが、一旦止まろうということになって、その止まろうっていったところが逆に止まっただけではなくて、衰退してしまったと。このコインチェックが事件が起きてから約9ヶ月、世界がどんどん動いている中で、日本国内での ICO は一切できませんし、日本人が買うっていうところにも問題が起きたりしてますので、そんな流れが起きたのが今までのこの9ヶ月です。ただ、日本の金融庁の方もそれが良しとしているわけではなくて、やはり圧倒的に人が足りなかったりとか、今までは IT 企業が取引所をやる、本来は金融経験のある会社が取引所をやる、このような形が一番ベストなんですが、なかなかそれが今までできてなかったと。で、今この問題が起きた後に各日本では16社の許可を得てる、金融庁の許可を得てるんですが、その16社に、きちっと各金融証券業をやっていた経験があるところの資本や人を入れなさいという指導のもと、今立て直しを図って、みなし業者が3社残ってるんですけれども、それも、近々許可が出るという話です。そうすると約、19社がきちっとした、証券業界の、知識、経験、知見を持った人たちが資本が入って、日本の取引所が活性化していく、こんな流れが、この数ヶ月以内にまた起きてくるでしょう。
Japan was a leading market in Asia, and Japan always aimed to be the #1 in cryptocurrency in Asia. Then we have the incident with CoinCheck. I believe you all heard about it. And when we had the incident with CoinCheck, government went actually to check what happened there, and they found out that the cybersecurity was quite low. And the reason behind that is because mainly IT companies were handling everything. And the opinion of the regulatory agencies is that for Japan to move ahead now, we need more professional, not just IT, but the banking sector has to get together with the IT companies in order to move forward in a more secure way and to improve security, the same way the banking sector currently does. So in Japan right now, about 16 to 19 companies got together in a lobby group, mainly consistent by IT and banking sector and financial sector companies, and they're pressuring the government with the lobby and what they wanted to see. And from the government standpoint, they believe that once IT companies get together with the banking sector, the security will be the security will be raised, and therefore Japan can move ahead with its regulations. So right now, Japan is working on new regulations, and we have a schedule for until the end of the year, we plan to be leaders again in Asia. Of course, Korea is also a big player, and Singapore is as well, but we believe that Japan will come to lead it in this arrangement with the banking sector and the IT sector getting together right now. And also the government behind it all, giving the direct support to the big Japanese companies.
Very good, thank you. Brian, we've heard some of your views already. I think predictability is very, very important for an industry, especially as it takes shape. I have a lot of friends in the hedge fund industry still, and they're putting a lot of effort into some sentiment kind of tools based around certain Twitter accounts, trying to sort of predict where things are at and going to. So what's your view on where the US on a federal level is heading?
Well, right now we're having to parse out words and language out of speeches, basically. It's been really hard. We haven't demonstrated the clear leadership that we should. I think it's self-evident when you hear the perspective from other regions and how aggressive they're tackling it, and I just don't see that initiative happening in our country, unfortunately. And it's just going to put us in a negative spot. But I'm hopeful that with these new elections, we're going to have new elected leaders who are more tech focused. We need a generational shift that's going to happen in our elected leaders, because right now those who are older are not stepping up to the plate to do this. And I think you can. I mentioned it earlier. When you look at we're not working on this in a silo. Emerging technologies are facing all kinds of regulatory challenges, and I think one interesting opportunity that we saw with regulatory arbitrage actually happened with autonomous vehicles. If you remember, the California DMV took away the license from Uber. The very next day, the governor of Arizona raised his hand and said, well, if you're not welcome in the state of California, you're welcome in the state of Arizona. And all of a sudden, the very next day, Uber loaded up their autonomous vehicles and shipped them over to California. And I think, the 21st century tax credit, when you talk to entrepreneurs, I don't ever hear them talking about, tax credits. Kind of one of the great catalysts that a lot of mayors and governors have for trying to attract business to their state or to their city. I think that the future is actually going to be regulatory sandboxes. How quickly are you addressing all of the regulatory hurdles at the city, state, and federal level to be able to allow for that experimentation to happen while still protecting consumer safety and consumer rights? We need to get there. Mark Andreessen proposed this with Drone City. He wrote a really long article about how Detroit could, in the wake of its bankruptcy, become the capital for working on drones by resolving a few of the regulations there at the city, state, and federal level. And so, I want to know from our elected leaders what is their thought process, and we got to look at different agencies as well, and where there are huge opportunities to be able to leverage this. How many of you have thought about the Department of Motor Vehicles? One person. That's probably because you had to wait in line for an hour or two or something. You were frustrated by it. But I would argue that if I was going to become elected governor in the next cycle, I would say that the Department of Motor Vehicles is probably one of the most important positions for appointing a leader. And you probably think, why? Because it's just kind of like, who the heck cares about the DMV? Well, if you think about it, DMV in the Department of Motor Vehicles in most states is the issuer of identity. But those are analog identities. We don't have, as a federal or a state or as a local government, digital identities that are issued by the government. Other governments are doing it around the world, but we're not. How much easier would that help address some of the friction that we have with KYC? But also, we look at identity theft. There's more. I think there's like north of $20 billion in identity theft every year and about $10 billion in physical theft. And the reason, in part, is because we don't have digital identities that are government issued. And that same body is in charge of regulations for autonomous vehicles. And you could use the title of cars and all kinds of things. And so I think there's huge opportunities within these agencies that have a lot of responsibility, that if you have smart elected leaders, they'll start putting tech forward people that have a high EQ to be able to address some of the challenges that you're inherently going to face in government, to do that. We did that in the Obama White House, and I hope that filters down to a lot of the mayors and governors. To not appoint a chief innovation officer. We don't need another one of those. What we need are leaders of agencies that actually have responsibility for hiring and have large budgets to be able to critically address all these issues and become a gateway, not impediment to all of the innovation that's happening around this country.
Thank you so much. Carla, with Circle, you're one of the major outfits going after a global market, so you must make bets on regulation, right? So and lawyers don't like to bet, even when we're in Vegas. I learned that lesson again last week. So what is your view? Where do you see things heading? How do you are structuring yourself, setting yourselves up as much as you can disclose it based on the regulation?
Absolutely. First of all, I do love to bet, and I'm a lawyer, so yeah, I'm a gambler. So I think we view regulation as kind of a constant across jurisdictions, meaning that we want to support good quality projects. And we feel like if we support good quality projects from ICO all the way through secondary trading, that's really going to get to most of the regulatory schemes and jurisdictions, right? Because they want to grow their economies, and they certainly want to provide good investments for investors. And then we just have to comply with each one. I mean, we want to be everywhere, right? But I think that's the kind of the first and foremost thought to Circle's strategy. We've also hired, key people across borders to make sure that we are reaching out to all decision makers, all stakeholders, and the community to make sure that we're serving their needs. So I think that's pretty much the overall arching strategy.
So would it be fair to say that you're seeing regulation more as an opportunity than a threat for yourselves? Because most of the players coming to the industry are startups, coming from the unregulated space. And then they are sort of like,
So I love that question, because the reason I joined Circle, I came from the dark side, the regulatory SEC side. So
you're not judgmental in here.
One of the reasons I did that was because this is the opportunity that we all want to craft the regulation that works for both the business. It's a great opportunity, but it's also our duty, right? And the more that we can get people to have confidence in these markets and confidence in the industry, the better off we all are.
I agree. It's interesting you mentioned the drafting of regulation, because again, that's very easily said. Now we have this problem that we're sitting on this legacy infrastructure of regulation, which was built for something completely different in mind. So essentially, I would say today we are using horse laws to cater to a car market. So the question is, do we completely do away with it, or can we sort of build on it? What's your view on this? Obviously, we have different legal systems, but Brian, maybe in the US, would you like to start from a clean slate and introduce totally new systems, or do you believe that the existing framework can be built out to accommodate this new reality?
Yeah, I think, when we look at regulations and we look at enforcement, a lot of it's post-mortem instead of algorithmic regulation, which I think is what we need to get to, which can help us understand and continue to be able to help protect folks in real time. And the challenge that we have right now with a lot of the tech companies is that they want to self-regulate, but they've consistently proven that they're not worthy of self-regulation because they've continually broken trust with consumers and with governments. And yet, the regulation that they're subjected to is antiquated, as you said. It's not built on a modern stack, you could argue. And so we need to get to a place where essentially you have an API into government that allows you to be able to use your modern stack and be able to communicate openly with government where necessary, where oversight is important. And at the same time, not requiring the regulatory burdens in terms of efficiency and human capital that are currently required. And the challenges that you have are that you have a small startup and they're automatically subjected to a lot of the burdensome regulation that are important to have, but they just don't have the resources to be able to do it at such a young stage. And so are there ways that technology can make this more efficient? Are there ways that we can get to regulatory sandboxes? Are there ways that we can get to algorithm regulation? It's going to require an upgrade in terms of the software that's being used at the city, the state, and the federal level as well. And I think that's going to be important. I think that's going to be part of that package that elected leaders are going to have to start to offer to attract the best and brightest, to their city or to their state or to their country, and it will, because I think ironically, even though culturally crypto has historically had a libertarian bent, it's actually governments around the world who have been some of the quickest and fastest and more fervent adopters, which is really exciting to see. We need to make sure that continues into the regulatory space as we continue to develop this out.
Right. You mentioned sandboxes, I think 5 times now across those two speeches you've been doing now. So I sense a bit of sandbox envy here in the US. But no, what it I think means is it's a great thing, and what it means I think it's part of the success of other locations like Switzerland, because what sandboxes conceptually stand for is inclusiveness.
Yep.
Basically, you get to the table, you bring the industry and the regulator together, and then you have sort of a discussion around it.
That's right.
And this is, I think, one of the reasons.
That's generally evidence-based.
Yes.
Right? Based on the information and the data, not on what you think could happen with worst situation. It's that could happen, but historically what we're seeing through the data that we're showing through the sandbox that you're seeing, that I'm seeing, is that actually something totally different is happening.
So essentially you would need also a change in the process of lawmaking, but basically including the industry more. It's sort of invite them to a green table.
Yep.
This is sort of an underlying principle. I don't want to blow the trumpet of Switzerland, but it's also happening in the UK and so forth.
Yep.
Right? You engage
UAE.
and then you jointly develop a new framework, which is then shared. You have ownership of that because everybody co-created that. So again, I believe the process as such must probably be changed, and then the trust element is there as well, because all the stakeholders collaborate on that. With that, maybe to Tanaka-san, you said Japan has this ambition to become a dominant player again. How does the process of creating the rules there work? Do you also have a sandbox-like setup, bringing the industry together? I know you're personally doing a lot of education in that space, but how does the process look like?
はい、今おっしゃったようにアメリカでは企業とガバメントがせめぎ合って決めていくって形なんですけど、日本はやはりもともとそういう文化があんまりなくて、どうしても下から上げていって、そこが上がったものを許可していくっていう流れなんで、今の話の要約になると、例えば今日本でも金融庁の動きがすごく遅かったと、この9ヶ月で、この9ヶ月をどう挽回するかということで、やはり金融庁内でも考えてますし、そしてまた日本の国会議員、与党自民党の人たちも考えてて、先月に自民党の議連が、仮想通貨議連が立ち上がりました。でこの仮想通貨議連が、金融庁に毎月、プッシュをかけてどうなってるんだと報告会を開き、ブラッシュアップして最終的にそれがルール化されてレギュレーションされている、そのような動きが先月から始まってて、今のスケジュール感でいくと多分、10月から11月に新レギュレーションができて、そして、日本国内の公式 ICO というものが、多分そこから、早くて 3,4 ヶ月、やっぱり1号案件は慎重にいくと思うので、時間かかるとしたら6ヶ月かかるかもしれない。そうすると日本での、認定 ICO というのが、来年の春ぐらいには、現実化するんじゃないかなと、そんなようなことを今自民党の議連の方と僕らもお話をして情報を得てます。そしてまたその自民党が金融庁の現場の人たちとどんどんそういう話をしているという、そんな流れが今の日本の現状かなと思います。
The situation in Japan is a bit different than in the US and Europe maybe. There's a cultural aspect to it as well. So in Japan, companies and the government, they get together on a monthly basis to discuss the future steps. So this recently, as we spoke before, Japan has created this lobby group consisted by CEOs of IT companies, the banking sector, and the government. And they get together every month to see how are they moving forward and how is this regulations going to be set up. But because of CoinCheck, everything got delayed, and we realized that we didn't have enough people working on it on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, discussing. So government and the private sector got together, and they decided to walk together now. They want to set Japan as a leader in this market. So right now, we had our last meeting, the lobby group last meeting with the government was last month. And what we found out in this last meeting is that Japan probably is going to release a new set of regulations by October or November. So we believe that by March or April, new ICOs and Japanese people will be able to join ICO projects as well. So we are moving really fast right now.
Interesting. Watch this space. Eva, I got two questions rolled into one with that. You know, Greece brought us democracy, and I would almost put on the same level the blockchain resolution. But I only hinted at it in my introduction. But since you're the driving force behind it, maybe could you share the key pieces of that? Because I think it's so amazing. Everybody needs to know about it. And secondly, since we were talking about infrastructure legacy type of regulation, there's another piece of regulation which is hugely important and which is getting a lot of negative reputation right now, and that's GDPR. And the problem with GDPR, as I see it, is it's trying to do a good thing, and people are sort of understanding that now in the Facebook kind of context. But obviously the key principles for it were created before people actually started to get their heads around blockchain. So it seems to be sort of conflicting with it. What's your view on that as well? Maybe both elements to you.
We included basically GDPR in the resolution. So what we try to do is to have a hands-off approach, but still to make sure that people understand that we are supportive of the technology. So we treat it as an infrastructure for every sector. So you can use this technology to change the energy sector, the voting systems, identity, smart contract, supply chain, and fintech, of course. And we took under consideration that we should wait to explore how the technology will develop in case of the energy consumption and the concerns that they are existing there. So basically, we thought that we are supportive, and this was really important because we had ECB and EBA not wanting to talk about this technology. They even avoid to call it as a currency or cryptocurrencies. They try to change the wording already. So we try to make sure that people will understand that if you want to invest, you have to comply with KYC, anti-money laundering directive, and the payment service directive. So this is to start with. And as I said, we already mentioned basically almost 6 months ago that we will not treat everything as securities. It's less than 30%, I think you can say, that there are securities, and then legislation is covering that. So we try now to have an observatory of crypto assets and ICOs, which means we will try to identify the different uses. I'm not sure if I'm going to manage to do that, but I try to have this approach of defining ICOs, as I said, investment instruments, and also to give you ownership rights by contract, so contract by contract, to have some rights there to claim or use a product or a service. And this means that you have also to be very careful. So we don't want to, we are technology neutral and business neutral. So we will give definitions and transparency, and then people can decide if they're going to invest or not. And of course, since, as I said, I see the prices and people are feeling not pleasant these days, I would suggest that since smart contracts need the cryptocurrencies, need the crypto tokens, I do believe that this is a technology that's here to stay and solve many problems. And also we included some small words, but that means a lot. Besides the access to 350 million euros immediately to test some projects like health and data, supply chain, and identity solutions. We also have included that at the EFSI report, which is a strategic investments for Europe, which means if you want to do an infrastructure to exchange energy, you can use blockchain, and you're eligible for financing and funding. Also, you can use it for copyright solutions, which is really important. We are struggling. It didn't pass 3 months ago, the legislation, and now we will include also that blockchain could provide us with solutions there. So I would say that if investors want to find the best projects, since the white papers are not now, they're not I would say, efficient and they're not specific enough. I would suggest to see if they're solving a problem, if they are removing some intermediation, so if they're actually removing something. And of course, if the team is good, and we will try to make sure to facilitate these new projects and ideas. And for GDPR, we just mentioned that they have to comply with GDPR, but GDPR, I think people were scared too much for that. It means that if you sell data and you make money out of it, and they're not anonymous, then you have problems with Europe. But at the same time, blockchain can guarantee that GDPR will be in place. So I see blockchain as a solution to make sure that some companies will comply with GDPR. So I don't see it as a problem. So we have, I think, the most positive approach there.
Very good. So when we talk about regulation, and it's been mentioned in your discussion before, it's more like different regions, countries competing to get a slice of the cake, or they're trying to be sort of protectionist about what they have, which is all good and fair. But one thing that was quite interesting for me to see is when China issued its various bans. Obviously the prices went down, but sort of 6 weeks later they were back up again. And I believe one of the reasons was that people realized that, well, the ban doesn't work because people will still do it. This is not a local thing. Obviously you could regulate 20 years ago the local mortgage market because you just basically kept everybody from coming in. But in this space, this doesn't work anymore. So the one thing is the political agenda of whatever you want to do. But on the other hand, I believe since this transcends national boundaries, there will be a need to collaborate. Now, we don't have a forum for that. We don't have a basis for that other than between agencies or regulators on a one-on-one basis. What's your ideas around that, Carla? Do you have a spontaneous recommendation to regulators how they should do that? Because I don't.
I think it's very difficult and very challenging. I mean, there are some groups, right, that like FSOC groups and that do try to work together. But I think it was you or Matthew that said, essentially, when it comes down to your jurisdiction, you're going to pass rules and regulations that make sense for your jurisdiction. So to try to get everyone to coordinate and pass the same types of rules, I find it almost impossible. Do you have thoughts on that, Brian?
Yeah, I think it's... when I go to China and I just see like new cities being built and they're building them from the ground up and they are really leveraging so many different emerging technologies and integrating blockchain as like part of a regulatory force to help manage it all. They're doing it as like part of competition, but also as like experimentation and learning, and they are really engaged in it as a competitive threat. You hear other leaders like Vladimir Putin, who says, artificial intelligence is going to be one of the most important things to invest in, and they are making a strategic effort to invest in that as well. So you're just seeing different leaders kind of manage it depending on their own national strengths and weaknesses. I don't think we talk about supply chain enough for mining. The U.S. is not in a defensible situation right now in terms of national security if cryptocurrency becomes part of our infrastructure or a threat. If a city or a state or a federal government in the United States was to start to use Bitcoin or Ethereum for part of their infrastructure, and and you look at the supply chain of where you get mining rigs, and you look at the composition of mining, that's some national security issue. So I think there are so many different aspects at play between national security, entrepreneurship, and innovation, where you're at as a country, and where you're developing and where you're investing versus not. If you're building a bunch of new cities, you have a massive opportunity. If you're not building as many cities, then you're using legacy systems. You look at the city of Detroit, they went bankrupt, biggest municipal bankruptcy in the history of our country, and they completely flipped the switch and now have one of the better technical infrastructures as a government. So they leapfrogged. We've seen leapfrogging before. This isn't new. So there's a lot of elements at play that are motivating leaders to do different things.
I can remind you, Greece, we have capital controls now that we're talking. So we have imposed capital controls from the banks to your deposits. You don't control what you do with your deposits, with your money. And in Cyprus, you lost your money. 4 banks are down. And I can tell you that, I don't know if people know, but in Europe, we did not vote for the European guarantee of your deposits. So, you know, there is like usually a safety net to have 100,000 euros of your deposits guaranteed by the member state. But if the member state fails, then Europe should be there, and it's not, because this legislation is not passing. It's like stuck at in the committee. So basically, we should explore new solutions, because all the criticism that I hear about anything illegal, it's happening with fiat. It's happening already, and the banks have so many hidden fees that there is a huge opportunity and potential to find smart ideas, creative ideas, and you cannot stop it, basically. So somebody was criticizing and said, like, no, with GDPR, blockchain is dead. It's a technology, you cannot shut it down, you cannot take down Bitcoin. You can stop using it, maybe in some ways, but the technology is neutral. It's not something that you can accuse, and it's really funny because we have to educate also our colleagues when they ask if we work for CIA or something. So this is something that takes time for people to understand that the cryptocurrencies and its uses are different than the technology, and the technology is global. So basically, I'm trying to do the crowdfunding report, but then the ICOs, you cannot limit that with national barriers, right? The digital economy is global, and you also have VPN, but I didn't say that.
Important point, and the future is decentralized. Thank you all for joining this panel.